Okay, we're going to get to all of that, but President Trump took the opportunity to highlight his administration's achievements during his second State of the Union address. The president mainly highlighted the strong economic success that the United States has seen in the last few years.
And we have
Which is what you'd expect, right?
Yeah, without a doubt, we have had economic success. It's been a continuation of the success that we saw throughout the Obama administration.
Let's take a look, actually, at the economy, which entered its 8th year of expansion when the President Trump took office. So the claim is that an economic miracle is taking place in the United States. That's what he said.
That's what he said. Yeah. And this is the truth. We have seen an acceleration. Yeah. We saw optimism and sentiment really skyrocket after he won. Yeah. But we've seen that taper off in the last year with all the talk of tariffs and trade.
The stock market was going up. It went up further when President Trump was elected. It was having a very good year in 2018. We ended up losing 6% in 2018. It wasn't actually about anything except toward the end when he was talking about trade war and interest rates.
Interest rates, when he was really going head-to-head, going after Jerome Powell, his Fed chair, that's when we really saw market volatility.
All right, let's take a look at jobs. That is something all presidents talk about in their speeches. President Trump said, we've created 5.3 million new jobs. Now, here's the problem with this. It's not all untrue. It's that he used a different start date. He started the job creation line before he became president.
When he became president, that would mean 4.9 million jobs. Listen, 4.9 is a good number. The president went on to talk about African-American unemployment, women in the workforce, jobs. And this is what makes no sense there. Yes, we have more women in the workforce than ever, but that trend has been going on since the 80s, and it is getting higher as the population grows.
Correct. So when he also talked about there being more people working than ever before. We also have more people in the United States than ever before. Manufacturing jobs. The president likes to talk about this. He said 600,000 new manufacturing jobs. Again, here's the interesting thing. He has created. There have been a lot of jobs created under this president in manufacturing, but it's 436,000, not 600,000.
And this number comes from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. And factor in that over the last 20 years, we've lost 5.5 million jobs in manufacturing. When you put this number into the total number of jobs created, this is not a turnaround.
Right, but it's still a number he can use. I just don't know why he didn't use 436 instead of 600,000.
Still a good number.
We were talking about women in the workforce. Let's take a look at what the president said about this. We have more women in the workforce than ever before. Well, first of all, to Stephanie's point, there are more people in the workforce than ever before, and given that women make up a little more than half the population, that would stand to reason, right? But women's labor force participation is 57.5%. So this is of all the women available to work of working age who could be working, 57.5% are. That peaked in the year 2000 at 60%. So interesting problem. We're actually seeing a smaller number of women who could potentially be working in the workforce.
Here is a positive, though. The president talked about paid family leave. And when he did, it was one of the rare moments when you saw Republicans and Democrats both stand up and clap. Now, he brought this point up the last 2 years when he has spoken before Congress. And I remember the first year, sort of Paul Ryan was like, am I clapping? Am I not? So the fact that you're seeing bipartisan support for paid family leave is a big start.
That's right.
Now, he has never mentioned affordable child care in this country. Compared to other developed nations, we are way behind.
On both of those issues.
Correct.
Affordable child care and paid family leave.
If you want to get this number up for women in the workforce, that's what you've got to hit.
That was exactly the point. The reason this has gone down is because it's expensive for families to have kids, because there's a big trade-off for women for child care and for work.
Once you get past paternity leave and maternity leave, you have a kid to take care of for the next 18 years.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about oil and gas. The president made some claims about American energy creation. He said the United States is now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas.
Said created a revolution.
Totally true. That we are the world's #1 producer of oil and gas and have been for the past 7 years. President
Obama actually made this point in his 2015 State of the Union address.
So the new Democratic majority in the House seemed to preoccupy the president, particularly when he wasn't delivering this particular line.
An economic miracle is taking place in the United States, and the only thing that can stop it are foolish wars, politics, or ridiculous partisan investigations.
But this morning, one of the top Democrats charged with running some of those investigations, Congressman Elijah Cummings, pushed back.
It's not about partisan investigations. we are doing what is demanded by our Constitution. That is to be a check and balance on the executive branch. As a matter of fact, we're sworn to do that, and we're going to do that.
All right, those investigations aren't going away soon. Nearly everything the president has been involved with is under investigation. Let's take a look at the first one. The Trump Inaugural Committee. This is what we were talking about yesterday. This is new news this week. A subpoena has been issued for documents pertaining to donors and guests. There's an investigation into the potential use of straw donations from foreigners. The idea that foreign governments either bought tickets to things which they wouldn't have been allowed to do or contributed money.
We'll find out. Next, his charitable foundation, his family foundation. It served as a checkbook for Trump's personal and business expenses, and that involves his entire family.
So there were things that he would have otherwise paid for, that most people pay for, that went through the foundation.
Like the $7 fee for Don Jr. to pay his annual dues to be in the Boy Scouts. Right.
So it went from payment went from this foundation to the Boy Scouts. So that's under investigation. By the way, the New York State Attorney General is investigating this as well. Let's talk about the transition team. There were contacts apparently with the Russians during the transition. That's the kind of thing that they're looking into. This was revealed by the special counsel during Michael Flynn's sentencing. So that's another one that they're looking at.
And now, then, of course, there's his family company, the Trump Organization. New York Times reported a tax scheme to evade taxes on inheritance, and that's a big one. Remember, that was a massive report they put out.
Right, and the allegations are efforts at massive tax evasion. One of the things that often happens in real estate is you want to get a loan against a property that you've got. Maybe the property's worth $1 million, so you used to shop around for an appraisal, and what you wanted was the highest appraisal possible so you could get the most amount of money. And that was actually common practice in New York and around the country. It changed with the financial crisis because you now can't pick your appraiser, nor can the bank. You can't keep on shopping for appraisers. But the appraisals on some of these properties, the example was that the property was valued at $500,000, and somehow they got an appraisal for $5 million so they could take money out against it.
So we'll find out, though. It's not like there's been any final decision on this. It could be there are lots of loopholes in the system, and they took advantage of those loopholes.
Right.
And in that scenario, that's a hate the game, not the player.
That's right. And that is a comment that came out of the very long New York Times investigation, that lots of people were involved in this. Let's talk about the actual presidential campaign. The allegations are that it coordinated with Russia to interfere in the election and the alleged efforts to contact Russians about information on Hillary Clinton. This is, of course, goes back to that Trump Tower meeting, what was going on with WikiLeaks, what was going on with Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi and that crowd. So that's actually the investigation most people think about, but that's underway as well.
And then there's the president himself. Obstruction of justice, Comey firing, reported in Michael Cohen's testimony.
Yep.
There are lots of ties of, did the president block an investigation? Was he trying to speak to potential witnesses who could have cooperated with Robert Mueller? And that's obviously what Robert Mueller is working on.
And what was the motivation for firing Jim Comey? Was it about the investigation, or was it that he didn't like Jim Comey?
And there were several major issues facing America that did not seem to find their way into President Trump's State of the Union address. Among them, the government shutdown, as another possible shutdown is looming that could be next Friday. We didn't hear much on gun violence as we approach the anniversary of the Parkland school shooting, and climate change, as scientists are warning us of the dangers that could be coming to our planet. Remember that massive report that came out from this administration just before Christmas.
And we continue to get more evidence that this is a serious problem. But the Democratic response, delivered by the failed 2018 nominee for governor of Georgia, Stacey Abrams, did not mince words when it came to federal workers and contractors and their uncertain reality.
Just a few weeks ago, I joined volunteers to distribute meals to furloughed federal workers. They waited in line for a box of food and a sliver of hope, since they hadn't received paychecks in weeks. Making livelihoods of our federal workers a pawn for political games is a disgrace. The shutdown was a stunt, engineered by the President of the United States, one that defied every tenet of fairness and abandoned not just our people, but our values. For 7 years, I led the Democratic Party in the Georgia House of Representatives. I didn't always agree with the Republican speaker or governor, but I understood that our constituents didn't care about our political parties, they cared about their lives. So when we had to negotiate criminal justice reform or transportation or foster care improvements, the leaders of our state didn't shut down. We came together and we kept our word. It should be no different in our nation's capital. We may come from different sides of the political aisle, but our joint commitment to the ideals of this nation cannot be negotiable. Our most urgent work is to realize Americans' dreams of today and tomorrow, to carve a path to independence and prosperity that can last a lifetime. In this time of division and crisis, we must come together and stand for and with one another. America has stumbled time and again on its quest towards justice and equality. But with each generation, we have revisited our fundamental truths, and where we falter, we make amends. Even as I am very disappointed by the president's approach to our problems, I still don't want him to fail. But we need him to tell the truth and to respect his duties and respect the extraordinary diversity that defines America.
So this is what didn't make sense to me. So the president is making the argument the only thing that could stop this booming economy is partisan investigations. The Robert Mueller investigation has been going on for almost 2 years at this point.
Right.
And the economy has been doing quite well during a lot of that time.
Phenomenally well.
If you talk about times where the economy has hiccuped, think about the last month. Jamie Dimon, CEO and chairman of JP Morgan, said, if the government shutdown continues, we could wipe out all GDP for the first quarter of this year. Marriott CEO said we're losing 30% of our business in Washington because of this. So for the president to say our economy is going to be SOL if we don't stop this investigation, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Stacey Abrams, when they announced that she was going to give the response, I always feel a little badly for that person, right? Because it's historically not always been the most successful event. It can be stilted, it can be awkward.
You're the last act in the parade.
Right, and she's a seasoned politician. She has been in the Georgia State Legislature for some while. She has worked on an issue that's really important to a lot of people, and that is voting rights. So I thought that was an interesting response. It didn't really hit on what was in the State of the Union point for point. It was a different message altogether.
It was as though she was sort of speaking to an America that's not just looking to be united, but an America that doesn't care about politics. Americans who are just trying to get by and live their best lives.
Yeah, it was an interesting response. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.